From the Bill of Rights Institute, Fabric of History weaves together U.S. history, founding principles, and what all of this means to us today. Join us as we pull back the curtains of the past to see what's inside. In 1692, the Massachusetts Bay Colony executed 14 women, 5 men, and 2 dogs for witchcraft. Although we will never know for certain what happened, there are various theories, both founded and unfounded, that have developed over the years. So what could have been the reasons for so many engaging in what was deemed wicked, malicious, and felonious sorcery? And how far have we really come today? Sit back and relax as Mary, Gary, and Eryn boil down the evidence.
Hello there, and welcome to our first episode of our new podcast, The Fabric of History. We're so glad that you found us. We're glad that you're here. I'm your host, Mary Patterson, and I love a good story, which is why I've always loved history. So I hope that you love a good story too, and that you'll come back and listen to us as we talk about the interesting, the funny, the strange, all of these great stories in history. And I am a senior content specialist here at the Bill of Rights Institute, so I work on resources for history and civics teachers. And I love my job because I get to deal with great stories every single day. And I'm here with 2 of my fabulous colleagues, Gary and Eryn.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? No, I'm super excited too. I think this is going to be a really great series. And you're right, stories are sort of the heart of it, right? The narratives of people and adventures that happened and the good, the bad, and I think the interesting things that tie together. So I love that too. So as I was a former teacher, I work in programs now, so this is for all of our teacher and student programs. But really, you know, we all work together on these, the big ideas that come out of these stories, right? Some of these, the big concepts and the big meaty things that have happened in history. I am not articulate right now, but we will over the course of this series. And if I may put a plug, we would love to hear from our audience too. So we do have a email address, comments@fabricofhistory.org, and we want to hear from you too. The stories you want to hear about, the things that really strike you, questions you may have, or just anything. We want to welcome you into our conversation because we just love chatting. If you love stories, I love chatting.
Well, yeah, and I think that's Gary and I were having a conversation about these podcasts and the topics and saying if we are already talking about it in our hallways, it's also good podcast fodder because we can go on and on and on about these topics and have a conversation with each other and then open it up and have a conversation with everyone else. And I said all that before ever introducing myself. I am Eryn Cochran. I work with Gary in programs and really excited to be here as well and just really talk about all of our favorite things in history and also kind of like our opinion on them and how we feel about them. And I think that's a really exciting thing about having all these stories is we also have all these feelings about them, and that's what allows us to talk about them kind of ad nauseum.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are real conversations that happen around the Bill of Rights Institute offices, and with lots of people we may talk to in the future about it. And so I think it's cool to invite everybody, including yourself, listening out there in your car, at home, or while you're running, I don't know.
I used to do that.
Good for you if you're running right now.
Oh,
do a lap for me.
Beautiful out.
Well, welcome aboard the story train here. So we're glad you're here, and let's jump into it, shall we? I was just talking with Garen.
I like it.
That's what true story. And it's after
like Benifer.
It's time. Yeah, no, it's the afternoon when I was teaching. I always conflated students' names in the last period of the day.
Okay.
I didn't know a Garen, actually. It was very confusing.
No, I'm used to it. My mom used to call me by our cat's name, so you know.
What's the cat's name?
Hazel.
Oh, that's a good cat name. So I was talking to Gary and Eryn about McCarthyism because I am working on the Bill of Rights Institute's forthcoming open resource textbook for AP U.S. History, which is called Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. So it's U.S. history, basically.
I was going to say, can I jump in? When does it start and end? I feel like I know this.
It starts in 1491.
Okay. Oh.
Before Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Yes. Right before.
There's a fair amount of generalization about the world before Columbus and the Europeans arrived. And then it goes up into the present day. Well, not quite
I was
the
gonna say, how
present
present?
day. It goes to Obama.
Oh,
It goes to
okay.
Obama. But if you're teaching AP US history, you know you're lucky if you get that far.
Right.
So,
And considering when it was being written, that was
Right.
present day at the beginning of the writing.
exactly.
Makes sense.
So, but right now I'm working in the 1950s.
Okay.
And so, of course, McCarthyism is a big thing. And this term that comes up repeatedly as we're thinking about McCarthyism is a witch hunt.
Yeah, that's probably peppered throughout a lot of American history, but it's interesting that it's rooted in something actual beyond being just a phrase we toss around now.
Right. And then, so I was talking about this with Eryn, and Eryn, as you may or may not know, as a small child, really loved dark things. So graveyards, witches, all that good
Donner
stuff.
Party.
It's
Yeah.
a certain
Donner Party.
it's a certain genre, students and children. And
I knew
so-
no one like me.
My best friend was into dark, thrillery type
Hey,
things too.
if
She
you-
still is.
If you don't watch Chilling Adventures of Sabrina right now, it is a really good show on Netflix.
Oh, yeah, I feel I've been told that I would probably like that.
Halloween is kind of one of the coolest holidays of the year
It is a pretty cool
for a lot of
holiday.
people. The whole look. Anyway, so you're a big fan of actual witch times.
Yeah, just really, Mary
Which
said
times?
it best. Anything macabre.
Okay.
But yeah, I was so obsessed with all this. Even I think just because a lot of it seems so far fetched or is just not the normal, and that kind of was also the Salem witch trials.
Right.
Right, so I think that's what's interesting is to us in our modern worldview with science and facts that witchcraft and the devil and magic seems silly. But if you're talking about the OG witch hunt, the Salem witch trials in American history, that it wasn't so far-fetched.
Right.
Like they very much believed in the devil. They very much believed in what we would consider to be superstition.
Right. And there must be resonance if to this, I mean, when I say to this day, literally this day, you'll see the phrase witch hunt thrown around. And that means that there's some understanding to what that phrase is referring to, whether or not it's the full actual Salem witch trials. That concept resonates with us enough that it still has a reaction that people have to a feeling, to a concept.
Yeah, and usually I would say something that people think is unfair.
Right?
That seems to be when
Right. It's
people
not
say
justified. Witch hunts are not.
Right, exactly.
Like, oh, goodness. Glad you got all the witches.
Yeah.
Well, it's not, they thought that for a while.
True.
But it's like Gary said, so this phrase comes up again and again in American history. We still hear it in the present day. So we thought it would be worth, helping Eryn out to work through her issues with loving these darker things and talk about the Salem witch trials and what happened and why is it so memorable? Why do we learn about it? Why is it still taught to kids? And what
Right.
can we pull from it today?
Well, what's really fascinating to me too is like I did a big history project in middle school on it.
So you were how old?
I was probably like 12 or 13. I don't
Okay.
know. But I never knew up until that point that there are just so many different arguments and theories about what really happened in Salem and why. And even preparing for this, it was really fascinating to constantly think about, like, even if it was a social thing or economic fight between these two neighboring clans, why was it all these children who were having these attacks?
So you'll need to give me some background in what you mean. You've mentioned neighboring clans and children with attacks.
Oh,
We
well,
need
we'll
to
get
back it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll
Back it up.
definitely
Let's
get
do
into
a-
it. But that's my big question. It's like what went down?
Great. So my experience was also in school, and I feel like also probably even younger. I feel like around the holidays, sometimes it would come up. When I say the holidays, like winter, as things got darker and trees lost their leaves, where I was in the Middle Atlantic.
Hocus Pocus starts coming on TV.
Exactly, the Halloween time. So it comes up, and I feel like it's introduced to children and then filled in year after year beyond that. So you were saying around middle school, you're doing an actual research project on it. But even then, I think it's worth sort of going back to and saying, like, what were the actual facts of what happened, or to the best of our knowledge? Like, what's the actual story?
Right. I think before we get into what happens in Salem proper, I think we should set the scene a
Oh.
little bit. So the Salem witch trials are taking place in 1692 to 1693.
Okay,
is when
so
they
actually a very
end.
short period of time. Again, I would have assumed it was years and years of this.
No, very short period of time. So it's the 17th century. That's always confusing. So it's the 1600s is the 17th century in New England. And just in general, that's a terrifying time to be alive.
Probably rough. Probably very rough.
I mean, we say that, and if you really just think about it for a minute,
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Imagine, if you
absolutely
will,
terrifying.
being fairly cold, I feel like, all the time, but probably not. But yeah, it was just, what else was scary about it?
Well, so first of all, you have, it's scary, I think, on many, like on a very basic, visceral level. You're living in what is, to you, wilderness in this. So the Puritans that come over and settle in New England, they come to New England because to escape religious persecution. So they wanted to purify the Church of England. They thought it was too Catholic for them. And rather than deal with that any further, they leave everything behind and they set up a new settlement in New England. They want to create a city upon a hill, which is another phrase that you hear a lot in American history. So they really thought they were going to be an example of godly living. So we can, we can practice our faith here. We can build our society. We can start afresh.
Start fresh, have a utopia.
Yes.
Okay.
But again, so they're in New England, I was born in New England, so I'm allowed to say this. It's very cold and dreary. Like the weather is not
in the
friendly.
fall, winter, probably
Right.
even early spring.
Like if you compare it to the weather in England, it's much more milder temperate. So the weather's totally new, crops are new, animals are new. There are people already living here, known as American Indians, that were pretty friendly to start, but that wasn't so much the case in the later 17th century. So it's scary, right? You have these big unknowns. Like, are we going to survive through the winter? What's in the woods? Are Native Americans going to remain friendly? And they, in fact, had not been too friendly because there was this big colonial fight called King Phillips War that had ended not too long before the Salem witch trials actually start. So King Philip, the name is a little misleading because he wasn't a king and his name wasn't really Philip.
Okay,
he
that
was
is
known
One
as
of the
Philip.
chiefs.
Yeah,
The Wabanaki tribe, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So he was the chief, and his father had a peace treaty with the settlers, but he didn't want to go by it because it made all of the Native Americans give up their guns, and he wasn't down with that. So King Philip War start, and it's really horrific. So half of New England's towns are attacked, and everyone is killed sort of on both sides. It's really grisly, frightening, traumatic.
Chaotic.
Time. Yes, very chaotic. And it's not that far from Salem. So Salem is really close to the water, to Massachusetts Bay, but the wilderness and, all the scary things are not that too far away from it. So all of this is going on before you have this outbreak of witchcraft accusations in Salem. And I think it's also worth pointing out, so the Puritans, so we said they're Protestant. They come to the New World to escape persecution, and they really did believe in the devil. So if they are the chosen people, they're creating this city on a hill, they are going to be challenged. So there's this great quote from the New Yorker. It says, the early modern American thought breathed, dreamed, disciplined, bartered, and hallucinated in biblical texts and imagery. So they're pretty, I don't know if superstitious is the right word for it, but to them it wasn't a joke. Like the devil was real. He had minions. He had people that would trick you. He had witches
Right.
to help
It was like a
him.
visceral part of your day in a very specific form. That's not just a general concept of like, well, there's good, there must be something vaguely bad. There's like actual out in the wilderness.
Yeah, it's scary. So I think we think, or maybe it's just me, think witches, like muggles, Harry Potter, and it's fun and cute. But this was scary. This was life or death. This was fire and brimstone. It was not fun and pop culture-y.
Well, and they were blaming the devil for like being the cause of the King Phillips War and everything that was going on. And they called the wilderness a devil's den. And so they're like, we live right here this is happening, and the devil is challenging us. And that was actually one of the big arguments for these witch trials, was saying we're being tested. The proof of this witchcraft is evidence that we are the chosen people, and that
So because the devil is paying attention to us,
correct,
we have not left the devil behind. He sees us.
He sees us, and we're being tested because we are the chosen people. That was Cotton Mather's argument. Yeah.
So we're jumping ahead a little bit to there being trials at this point. So I'm imagining a very scary world, a very real, I'm imagining darkness and strange sounds from the woods, and the idea that either human beings could come kill me, or animals could come kill me, or vague unseen things could come kill me, because disease is real and I grasp it, but it's terrifying. And again, to this day, I think it's a scary thing. But also the devil himself might come get me.
Yeah, I think that's...
Is that the scene?
I think that's the scene. And also just, again, that this worldview of the Puritans believes in the devil, and just religion is so important. It really dictates so much of your life. So I think we tend to compartmentalize that in our lives today, but it permeates everything. So when things start going wrong in the minister's household, that's when we start seeing that it could be the devil. So now we're actually in 1692, and something happens, and we're gonna conclude that it must be witchcraft.
Even before Salem, Boston had already hung some witches, like 40 years. No, not 40. Well, the first time someone confessed to witchcraft was like 1648 in Boston.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then 1688, someone was accused and hung of witchcraft in Boston.
Oh, so it was only 4 years prior.
Right, exactly. So that's what I'm saying. It's really
memory.
fresh on their minds, because Reverend Samuel Parris, where the first two girls had their attacks, he had read about it, and it was at the forefront of his mind.
So when you say attacks, tell me about that.
Well, it's really interesting. I think what the descriptions that they have about these. My favorite, I'm going to start with my favorite one, which was the one that was in 1688. They said that these children were barking at one another like dogs.
Okay.
Which I did as a kid, so I
was
don't know
gonna
what
say,
that
children do
says
that.
to me. But also fly like geese on one occasion for 20 feet. And
So a child was flying in the air.
like a goose for 20 feet. Again, I'm not really sure how or where this came from, and it's hard to...
I see. So it's like a witness said that it happened.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
But
obviously there's no
obviously,
video footage of it.
but that didn't happen. So
Do I?
I would hope so.
It was something
That's-
unexplainable. So
Right.
I
But
Okay.
this child flying like a goose, I just, in my mind and what I'm imagining. Anyways, and then jaws, wrists, necks flew out of joint. It's just a very interesting description. And I think that just kind of what continued in Salem. So let's see, when it was Abigail and Betty were the two, it was Samuel Parris's niece and daughter, who were 11 and 9 respectively. So they were complaining of bites and pinches by invisible agents, which, I mean, you're just going to believe this child anyways. Their bodies shuddered and spun. They went limp or rigid. They would interrupt sermons and fall into trances at church. That just sounds like a kid acting out to me, honestly.
A bored kid in church.
But and this is like a direct quote from the description of all their symptoms. Neither appeared to have time for prayer, though until January, when this happened, both had been perfectly well behaved and mannered. So it's like, oh, if they're not praying, they're not in church, something must be wrong.
Okay.
They're starting to act out. It's the devil.
Right.
The devil has come.
But like you said, so just to backtrack, you set the scene very well, where it's been years and years of a terrifying new universe that you're in, with a lot of things who can be attacking you. People are on edge. There had been wars. There had been these things that were happening, and then suddenly, and you said January, just when things are at their coldest, children start doing really weird stuff in your estimation. And so the link to it being some external force sort of starts making sense.
Right. And then I do think it's worth pointing out that this is in the minister's household, right? So this is the reverend. It's his daughter and his niece.
The one, so like.
That are in Salem, and then they're not, and they can't explain this behavior. So he doesn't know what's going on. He's fasting and praying. He consults other clergymen, and then he calls in a doctor. And of course, medicine at this time is laughable, if not disgusting, and that he can't figure anything out. Like, I don't know what's wrong with these girls.
Well, the doctor said it's the evil hand.
Right. After examining with whatever medical tools.
Snails, beetle's blood, fox lung, dried dolphin heart. Yeah. I want to know where they got the dolphin heart.
Very Harry Potter potions, yes.
But seems appropriate for the Salem witch trials, right?
But then other young girls start to have these weird fits also. And of course, so now everybody's freaked out what's going on, and the girls are naming names. So they're saying...
The second set of girls who are having fits are naming names?
All of them.
Oh, they're all like, this is because of so-and-so in town.
They've been enchanted.
The Paris household they were the ones who said it was Tituba, I believe.
Tituba?
Yes.
So Tell me more.
She
was their slave.
Who worked for the Paris household. And she actually, first she said, she wasn't the only woman who did this, which I also find fascinating. First she said, no, this is not true. And then she said, oh yes, I've been talking to the devil. And consorted with them. Whatever. And the other witches and wizards.
Tituba, she's an interesting character in this story because she's, as Eryn said, so she's an enslaved woman. She was in the Paris household with her husband, and it's unclear if the Reverend got them from Boston, if he bought them from the Caribbean. So we don't know where they came from. But this woman, she's an enslaved woman. She has no recourse for anything. She's been accused of witchcraft. She does confess. And was she beaten to get that confession out? No one knows.
Right, somehow.
But she wasn't she was I don't know how many other slave men and women may have been accused of witchcraft, but it very quickly became this witch hunt. But other women who were not slaves were also confessing.
Yeah. The weird thing is if you pled guilty, you weren't killed. Right?
I think
Am I messing that up? Wait, that doesn't sound right, but that's right.
My memory of this is from Monty Python.
Most of them, because
not that far off. Actually.
Because a lot of the ones who ended up kind of reversing and like, oh no, I actually knew the devil and we flew around on broomsticks, and they would say, I flew on a broomstick with my neighbor.
Bring them in
Betty.
On it. Right.
Yeah. And
so if Betty's guilty,
And so they use it. I mean, in all honesty, kind of we have this system in our courts today, right? Like you get a plea,
right.
And you get a lesser sentence if you pull someone else in. And so I think that was kind of their logic unofficially.
Right. So if you're being persecuted, if you say something that you are a witch, you have less of a sentence than if you say I am not a witch, and the way to test that is yes.
Yeah. So I'm second guessing myself because it sounds so.
Well, I think there's the classic story of like the water dunk, right? There's we'll put you underwater. If you drown, then you're human, so you're innocent.
But
if you don't drown, then you're a witch, and we'll put you to death.
There are all sorts of.
But again, I don't know if that's not apocryphal, that story.
Well, that was one of the tests for a witch. So the Monty Python sketch where they, weigh and they put her in the water.
They used it.
They used that. So there's this great link. I think we can put it up on our page about tests that were used against witches. But there's this catalog. There's this literature of how to find a witch, what witches do. So this was not some crazy theory. They very much believed in this. And floating the witch was a real test. So
based on research,
right? If you, so the idea is the witch has not been baptized, so the water will reject you.
Okay.
So if you sink, you're innocent. The water has accepted you.
I see.
Weird. It's very bizarre.
I mean, all these were bizarre. There was the touching test. So they would have these girls who had already accused these women and men, like, oh, have the girl go up and touch this person. And then the kid would freak out. And like that was literally called the touching test, to see how this child would react when touching the accused.
Again,
course.
flawed. So if I
That is a specious test.
I've
Right.
like accused Eryn of bewitching me.
Right.
So I'm gonna have a fit until Eryn touches me, and then I stop. That proves that Eryn bewitched me.
Right, I see.
So I'm
It's a
in
flawed
control.
test.
Yeah.
Yes.
But that was
because
one of the tests.
and again, we're trusting these 9, 11, and 12-year-olds. But the one that I would have been very concerned about if I were alive during 1692 were the witches' marks, also known as moles.
Ah.
Because I am very fair-skinned and have lots of freckles and lots of moles.
Despite being audio, you can trust that.
Eryn is one giant mole. I'm sitting right next to her,
That sounds
folks.
very
and that's how I would
unattractive.
describe her. I'm just kidding.
So would you count
But-
the moles?
Well-
or connect them?
They would. It was like a dermatology skin test where they would look at them, because the idea was that these moles were upon like what a witch's familiar would suck. It was
Ah.
Yeah,
Now,
like-
for the uninitiated,
Yeah.
a familiar is...
A dog, a cat, an owl is some sort of creature that works
again
with,
Harry Potter reference
that
type
works
of thing,
with
right?
the witch.
Okay.
So you could transform into this character and
Yeah.
go out and bewitch other people.
I see.
And then the mark, so it could be, again, it could be a mole, a birthmark, would be anything that could be taken as evidence that you're familiar. So my cat suckles from
Yeah.
my mark.
Could bite you. Or, yes,
Yeah,
that's right.
but again, so like if you think of Harry Potter, they have their owls and they have their cats,
Right.
and it's very cutesy, but it's really kind of dark.
And it's an interesting idea. If the
Background.
wilderness is terrifying, then you have a friend in the wilderness is kind of a
You're
logical
familiar.
leap, right? It's like you are familiar with this terrible border of woods out there,
Well, and then you got the association with black cats and
right?
Yeah.
Which again has become very adorable
Yeah.
now.
Well, but what also still superstitious,
Right.
To see a black cat. So there's a little bit of both.
But I mean, these, if you're accused of witchcraft by mostly young girls, this is what you have to go on. So in May,
I would have been accused, pretty sure.
Can I? Oh, sorry. You were saying I was
Well, I
going to
was
ask a
gonna-
question about the girls.
go ahead.
Was there anything in common to these girls?
Some of them, yeah. So a lot of them had lost fathers during the King Phillips War, like had been orphaned, which or were refugees
Right.
from these battles.
Abigail, so the niece, so one of the first two girls that starts having these fits, she was orphaned, and that's why she's living with her uncle, the Reverend Paris.
Interesting.
And I mean, teacher me, when I was reading this, because I taught young kids, I was like, ding, 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 adverse childhood experience, trauma.
Yeah, definitely.
That kids
I mean, this
act
is-
out when they experience significant loss like that. So, the teacher side of me is like, that's their cry for help.
Do you think they had any concept things would go as sideways as they did?
Can kids have concept
I don't
for
Can
that?
kids have concept?
No. Can they have a concept for...
I don't know if anybody
I
could
think
know that
when-
it's going to go into what
Right,
happened in the
think- but that's-
1690s.
What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
like, when you're 9 years old, are you really going to realize the repercussions of your actions on that level?
I think in their defense, I don't know anyone could have foreseen what was going to happen,
True.
even if you were an adult.
Right.
Yeah,
And I
I
just
mean-
think but that's what I'm saying. It's that much harder
Right.
for these 9 to 12-year-olds. You just think about it, even when we were kids or any other kid we see act out, they're not really thinking about the repercussions of their actions. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. They're testing their limits. That's why kids act out.
Maybe.
Yeah. I think we're getting into maybe some of the theories as to why this happened. So I think maybe we should take a quick break and we can get into the trials themselves.
Oh,
Because
that's
we
a good-
previewed it a little bit with the touching test and the
Right.
looking for the witch's mark. But there's more fun stuff in store as to how the trials actually went down. So we'll take a quick break and be back with you in a second. Okay, we're back.
Hey.
So, Eryn's still here with her mole.
Right. We are not.
And Gary.
Although we're thinking
Accused
twice
witch
now.
Eryn.
Yeah.
Accused witch
She
Eryn.
flies like a goose. We got her eye on.
I'm embarking
Contort.
like a dog. Okay, so before the break, we were starting to get into like why could this have happened? Why, what spun out of control or what might have motivated this? But want to take you through kind of what happened at the trials because it's just an interesting story.
It is.
Worth getting into. So we have these girls, young girls that are accusing people in the community of witchcraft.
And this is like winter.
Right. So it starts in January, February of 1692.
Okay.
And by May, a court is set up to try these cases. And the court is called the Court of Oye and Termine. So it's
Ooh, I
French.
pronounced that all wrong.
Well,
my
I'm
whole life.
pronouncing it French. I don't know. Maybe that's not.
I'm like
Maybe it's
Oyer
like-
and Terminer.
Maybe it's like Notre Dame or what? 'Cause French people hate the way we say Notre Dame.
Oye,
anyway.
as in.
Oye to hear and
Right.
termine to determine.
That makes,
Gotcha.
Well, isn't that close to what they say at
Oye,
the beginning
they say
of court?
Oye.
Here,
Yeah.
here.
I think they say oye.
Oye,
Oye.
at
They
the
say
beginning
oye?
of court when
Okay.
the judge comes
Okay.
in. Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
there
that
you
makes so
go.
much sense.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Hey.
So there are 5 judges, and we already talked a little bit about before the break about the touching test and the witch's mark, and so the way that this is not justice as we think of justice and due process today. This is not a fair trial. So the witches have no legal counsel. They can't have witnesses.
Well, it's
They can't appeal.
pre-constitutional times.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But that they are coming over with I was going to say they were British English colonists. So this idea of common law and precedence, they have a trial at least, I guess, but it's not much of a trial.
Well, and 3 out of the 5 judges were also good friends of Cotton Mather, and their chief justice was a gung-ho witch hunter.
Sorry,
it was
Cotton Mather?
Yes. How would you describe Cotton Mather's role? He's just another reverend in the area, he was a Harvard educated with his father Increase.
I'm sorry.
Mary
just
loves the
names.
names.
Sorry.
names-
Cotton and Increase.
Yeah. These are some great
just to
names
follow
and
along,
curious
just so I'm
I will
tracking
name
this.
you Cotton.
So you've mentioned someone named Cotton Mather, and his father's name was Increase Mather.
Yes.
And they
had a
were-
lot to say about. They did a lot. They wrote a lot. I believe a lot of scholarly articles.
Right, they're
on the
leaders in
witchcraft.
Puritan society.
Okay,
Yes,
and they have a
they're
very
very-
strong.
They're educated men.
Fr-
So one
to
of them, I don't
Harvard.
know which one, is the president of Harvard. They're also
I think it's Increase.
Okay, so they are the
email us.
the local sort of higher
the
echelon.
heavyweights.
Okay,
Yeah.
the
gotcha.
heavyweights.
But we're, in my opinion, very much behind and backing all of the people who were the accusers, and believe that in this, that the devil is testing us, and they're very much on that side. And so when this started happening, they just, I think, gathered all their good friends to be part of the judges.
Okay.
That's a lot of, it's basically just cronyism.
Yeah, but it's,
Right.
I do. So the odds, if you're accused, the odds are stacked against you. You have these, what to our minds are very bizarre tests. But again, there are documents, there are manuals on how to catch a witch.
It's considered the
circulating
best
Europe.
test. It's not like they're just like,
Yeah.
well, that's just, I don't know, let's try this.
Right,
It
there's
sounds like they
precedent for this.
believe that if we're going to test if someone's a witch, this is the way
one of
you
the ways
do
we
it.
can do it.
Gotcha.
Right. And they're also, in the Salem trials, they're allowing spectral evidence. So that's evidence based on visions and dreams.
That's amazing, first of all. Spectral evidence.
Yes, that's a great term.
So you can use dreams as evidence,
As evidence.
admissible in the trial.
And visions. So again,
Whose dreams?
These children.
the accused. So I have accused Eryn of witchcraft. So I could say I had a vision that Eryn flew off into the night with her cat.
So the
and joined the
accuser's
devil.
dreams could be admitted.
Right.
So,
I got you.
Right.
So one of the guys who was convicted was John Proctor, who was actually also a character in The Crucible, but based on this real life man.
Okay.
And the kids who testified against him testified that ghosts had come to them and accused Proctor of serial murder in their dreams.
Yeah. So this is spectral evidence.
That's-
And they were allowing this in this court.
Okay.
So in the defense of some people in the society, so some people were upset by the way that the fact that the trials were unfair.
Right. It was very obvious to some people who were like,
yeah,
wait a second.
Wait a minute. We can't use spectral evidence. So there was no precedent for using spectral evidence as proof in English law. So they didn't like that. And they said, we need more proof. This isn't working out, saying you had a dream. So there were some critics, but the trials are still going on, and there's actually 4 different hangings where they're executing people who are found guilty.
Based on spectral evidence.
That's based on spectral
Wow,
evidence.
okay. But there's a drive then to say we need physical proof, so let's think of how does one physically prove witchcraft?
Right.
Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Yes, I think that. So things are getting out of hand. So a lot of people, again, so like some people would say, like take the plea to avoid death, and then they're executing people. And people are starting to raise eyebrows like, wait a minute, maybe we should disband the trials. So that's what they do. And they get rid of spectral evidence. They don't use it anymore. And once that happens, they sort of peter out.
Because, yeah, everyone was basically acquitted after that.
Right.
And they're like, well, I guess we can't do it.
And then,
we can't.
Probably exactly how they said it. Is that a direct quote? Well, I guess we can't do it.
Reader's Digest version.
Sorry. So, but yeah, and then people some of the judges start to apologize, like this got out of hand, or I didn't mean for it to go the way that it went. But witchcraft, I think, still permeates people's minds. It's still something that's real. It's just the way the trials were going, I think, was starting to raise eyebrows.
So it's not like the concept of witchcraft evaporates. It's just that we can't do the trials anymore about this.
These trials aren't fair. This isn't justice.
This is not how you deal with it.
Right.
Or what they
but
were
it doesn't mean
using.
it's going away.
Right.
Yeah. Something else we were talking about on break was the case of George Burrows, who was another one of the accused wizards, being male. And he was convicted and sentenced to hang. And when he was up on the gallows, recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly, which in the past had always been used if you could not recite the Lord's Prayer perfectly as evidence that you were a witch or a wizard. And then he's up on the gallows, and all the crowds are stunned that this accused wizard has just recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly.
Seems like evidence he can't possibly
Right,
do.
and they're saying, stop the execution. But then there are a couple other people who are saying, well, what better disguise might the devil choose on this occasion than to masquerade as an angel of light? But it was with the dismissal of spectral evidence and then this hanging of George Burrows, people really started to lose faith, for interesting language for me to use, faith in these Salem witch trials, and saying like, we might want to second guess. We can't do this anymore. We can't do this anymore.
We don't even. It's not even being based on things.
Yeah, right. And it was.
But
it was getting shakier, right? Like, hey, we were able to usually say, if you can't recite the Lord's Prayer, you're a witch or wizard, and then that didn't fit anymore with George Burrows.
Right. And it goes back to the idea that people saw what they wanted to see. If
Exactly.
they wanted to see him as guilty,
fitting their narrative.
they will fit whatever. And whoever was like, no, this guy's still guilty.
Yeah, but that upset a lot of people.
Right.
There was not as much of like a social backing for these trials anymore.
And I guess that permeates to what we were talking about earlier, that phrase still refers to an inherent this is wrongness, right? So whether or not belief in witchcraft doesn't vanish at that time, to this day, the idea of mobs or groups unfairly persecuting something without much evidence still is something we think is a terrible idea, which is why we refer to it as witch hunts.
Yeah, but I think the witch trial. So it's an example of when things go sideways, as Gary, as you said earlier. I like that phrasing.
It really sideways.
It's very dark. I mean, we're laughing about it, but these people are accused.
Yeah, these are
their
human
lives
beings.
are at stake.
Yeah, terrible things.
And it's terrifying, and many people are going to die. But there were people who were criticizing, and there were people who wouldn't give in, like John Proctor, who said, I'm not a witch, and I'm not going to say that I'm a witch to get out of it. And he's killed. And there was another man, I don't remember his name, but he wasn't hung. He was pressed to death. Which, if you're not familiar with this,
Giles Corey.
Yeah, Eryn, do you want to tell them, because you like macabre things or stuff? It's just be like
It's
squished
horrific.
to death. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
no, they
put
just
something
put like
heavy
a
on you.
they just put a giant
Putting more and more heavy things on him.
big, what did you call it? Like piece of wood over you, and then just kept adding boulders. But
Wow.
I believe he literally laid under there because he was also like 88 or something.
Jeez.
Which is
So
all
messed
just so
up.
messed up.
Puritans, you were messed up.
That is
That's
messed up.
Presentism, but
And they kept adding these boulders, and he said more weight.
it's hardcore.
Or was that the
Or was there a
maybe
question
it
mark
was,
in there? It was like more
that's what I
question
thought,
mark?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait.
No. Importance of grammar, right?
He was sticking it to the Puritan man,
Right.
even,
Yeah.
even as he was being executed.
That is wild.
But so I think that it's
Did this draw crowds, by the way?
Oh, it was.
I feel sure it must have, because executions in history generally drove,
Which is also
which
a
is also
whole other
really twisted.
Whole other
So
discussion
twisted.
about the
I
pillorying.
always thought that when I watched Poldark, like there's such big crowds at these executions. Like,
But wouldn't
what?
there be? I don't think
Yeah.
we're past that.
Oh no, I agree.
That's my theory. I'm sticking to it.
I mean,
Send your
I'd
comments
watch,
to
Yes.
comments
I'd watch
at
that.
fabricofhistory.org.
I'm still that person that in TV shows will close my eyes.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm also one of those people. But I feel
I'm not
sure
saying
The
we're-
psychology of
I
that-
understand the psychology of it. I'm
Right.
just saying personally, no.
I mean, everybody knew everybody in this
Yeah, right.
society.
But that makes it even more messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Like,
well,
let's go
there's nothing
watch-
else to do. I don't know.
I don't know that we're very different over the course of human history from ancestors.
I mean, I think this was fear. It was paranoia. It was social pressure. I mean, those are things we all deal with
Right,
today.
exactly.
That's in essence, part of being a human being. So whether we're
Right.
talking about 1692, or we're talking about 2020, these are still issues, even though we largely, I think it's fair to say, don't believe in witchcraft and turning into animals and flying off to bewitch people anymore in real life, just in children's books.
And Harry Potter.
Well, yeah. Well,
Young adult.
young adult.
I'm not correcting you. I'm just saying it is extremely popular.
They're also adult novels.
that deal with that stuff.
Night
But
Circus.
But I think, we talk about, at BRI, we talk a lot about, virtues and the things that we have to have in order to have a successful community and a civil society. I think justice is one of those things.
Yeah.
And this was a case where there certainly wasn't justice. But there were people who throughout said, hey, this isn't just, this isn't fair. And in the end, they did prevail. So maybe that's the takeaway
Yeah.
from this.
Yeah. And you used the term presentism before.
Darn it. I did.
I'm intrigued.
I did. So it's an ism, so it's a tricky term. So I would explain it as trying to evaluate the past through your own lens, your modern worldview. So like we've been doing that kind of jokingly at some points in this podcast, just by saying, oh, well, that explains that. You were clearly a witch, and laughing at it. But again, in the 17th century, witchcraft was real. It would be like saying there's not a pen in front of me. There is clearly a pen in front of me, to say that there wasn't witchcraft.
There is, in fact, a pen in front of her.
Yes.
For our listeners
There
at home.
is no spoon if you're a Matrix fan. So it's...
So that reality, that real experience, to envision it from our eyes is not exactly...
It can be problematic.
Right.
It's something...
And that's all I mean, too, about how we would be today. I don't know. I think... Putting yourself in those shoes, it's understandable how people would behave in a certain way.
And it's kind of like, of course, we look back and say, oh, witchcraft, it's not real, and we have all this science and what we can or can't prove. Right, because who knows also where we'll be 100 years from now in terms of science and technology.
Right.
And what is it that we believe now? And in 100 years, they're going to be having another podcast and laughing at what we've just talked about.
Goodness, podcast in 100 years.
Well,
Yeah.
Or whatever that
Or
iteration.
400 years from now, be
whatever
like
that
the wild
iteration
things
will
that
be.
we thought were true.
The robots
Exactly.
will be podcasts.
Yeah.
The AI will take over the podcasting industry.
That might yeah.
But I think that's a really interesting point that, even if we apply that kind of time travel of 100 years, there still are people at that point who say this is not. Justice somehow is eternal throughout all of this, which I think is a really interesting point.
So too. So I think we're running out of time today. So we're going to have to say goodbye to you. I have to go charge my crystals. I actually don't know if it's a full moon, but
got a whole thing about
say,
magic. I feel like we hope we talk
lay them
again.
out in the
That is
sun.
very interesting.
Well,
it's got to be the full moon.
But that is still a big thing too. That jade rollers for your face.
There's a lot of stuff that I think we could justifiably say is an interesting part of today that we should save for another episode. So I hope people do join us for future episodes on subjects such like that.
Yeah, and if you have anything else that you want to add or discuss about the witch hunt, Salem witch trials, anything else you think is cool and macabre that I, Eryn, would be interested in, you can email us.
Where?
Comments at fabricofhistory.org.
Great.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
The Bill of Rights Institute engages, educates, and empowers individuals with a passion for the freedom and opportunity that exists in a free society. Check out our educational resources and programs on our website, mybri.org. Any questions or suggestions for future episodes? We'd love to hear from you. Just email us at comments@fabricofhistory.org. And don't forget to visit us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram to stay connected and informed about future episodes. Thank you for listening.